Hello and welcome, assuming you can hear me okay, to the Sumo digital audio panel, who are going to be talking to you about audio in games. So I've got a little preamble bit to do to welcome everybody in, and then we'll get on with the actual panel talk. So we hope everybody's going to enjoy today's session and get involved in Industry Week as much as possible. Remember, you can share your week with us by posting photos to your social accounts using the hashtag IW22. By tagging Confetti on Instagram and Twitter, you can get entered into the Industry Week 22 photo competition, and the best photographs will be voted for by students, and the winner is going to receive a £50 Amazon voucher, so you can buy a game or something maybe, but not a deluxe edition, obviously, because 50 quid probably won't go that far with it. Don't forget as well, there's plenty of other events that are going on, and you can still book in using the iwconfetti.ac.uk web address, and make sure you sign in using your Confetti or NTU email address. For those people that are having problems accessing the stream, that's more than likely the issue. You need to make sure that you are accessing the stream with the right email address. So if you can pass that on to anybody who is struggling, make sure they've got the right email address. You can also check out previous year's talks and masterclasses in the on-demand section of the Industry Week website as well. Okay, cool. I think we're ready to go. So let's begin. I think by introducing each other. So I guess I should probably introduce myself as well, because some people in the chat might not know who I am. So I'll start with me, and then we'll pass on around the room. My name's Dan, and I'm the curriculum lead for games at Confetti. So I run all of the games departments at Confetti. So hopefully there is a mixture of students from our FE college level students right the way up to our university, and potentially master's level students as well in the talk today. So I'll hand over to Ross, just because he's next to me on the screen, on my screen.
Cool. Hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Ross Tregenza. I'm a composer, and I'm also a lead audio designer at Sumo Nottingham. Been in the industry for 20 years now. First game was Time Splitters 2 a very long time ago. Most recently been working on Texas Chainsaw Massacre for Sumo Nottingham, and also Deathloop and Cyberpunk over the last few years. Yeah, that's me. Should I pick someone to throw to?
Yeah, you might as well, yes.
Let's chuck Dex under the bus, shall we?
Thanks. Hi, yeah, my name is Dexter Pryor, and I'm a sound designer at Sumo Nottingham. Ross is my boss, so I have to be nice to him and tell him how amazing his music is all the time, which it actually is, so that's good.
That's disingenuous now.
Yeah, I've been in the industry working in game audio for about 5 to 6 years, and before that was working as a freelance sound designer, mainly on short films, animations. I wrote a few songs for the Beano. I quite like it, but it's also sort of terrible, a parody song, Ed Sheeran parody song about his time off from being a celebrity. Yeah, but the games I've been most recently working on, a small game called Forza Horizon 5, which you may have heard of, released last year. Yeah, that's me.
Over to Jay.
Hi, I'm Jay Waters. I'm a composer and audio director at Sumo Sheffield. I've been in the industry about 16 years now. I've just passed 10 years at Sumo. The last game I worked on was Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which came out with the PS5 at the end of last year. Prior to that, I spent quite a long time generally looking after the Little Big Planet franchise. And before Sumo, I did about 6 years at Team 17, working across quite a wide variety of titles, but a lot of Worms games, Lemmings, Alien Breed, amongst others. That's about it.
So that's the introductions all done, which is great. So lots of things in the chat. I think people are impressed with the sort of caliber of your production so far. So I think it would be useful for the students to get an understanding of how you came into the industry. I suppose that would be useful for them. Obviously, we've got a mixture of students. Some are just starting their journeys really on the level 2 courses and level 3 courses at Confetti, and others are, you know, getting ready to graduate in the next few months and looking to step into the industry themselves. So it's always useful to hear people's entry point into the industry. So I don't know who wants to start that sort of discussion off. Whichever person would like to start. And it puts pressure. If you go first, you know, your story is going to be instantly good, isn't it? You know, so yeah, it puts less pressure on you to go first, I suppose.
Jack's under the bus again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, so I guess for me, so I've always been interested in games. Always loved playing games since I can remember. And it wasn't really until I'd started doing a lot of freelance audio work in general. And this sort of might sound quite strange, but I sort of found it really easy and kind of not, I don't know, there was something missing for me. I wanted a bit more of a challenge and like to solve problems in a way. And I just really remember, I think it was around the time that the Last of Us remastered came out, and then also I think the original Destiny 1 came out, and I started playing that, and I was like, wow, like there's some things going on here which I'm just so impressed by. You know, I work in sound, maybe I should work in the games industry. And from then on, I really just sort of started watching videos, reading stuff, yeah, all about the games industry and how to make audio for games. And yeah, I just sort of ended up, I'm still following it today. You know, I'm still learning all the time. But yeah, I just sort of kept pulling at that kind of thread of like my interest in games and audio. And really, I just said yes to a lot of things, which was getting involved with the audio community. I started getting involved with a game audio meetup group called Game Audio North, which organizes just sort of networking events for people interested in game audio outside of London, essentially. There's a lot of studios down in London as well, but yeah, we just felt like there needed to be a bit more kind of coverage up north, which was great. And I've met a lot of friends who are, working wide in the industry through that way, which was good. And then getting involved in a lot of game jams as well. When I first started getting involved in game jams, I was probably the only person doing sound design there, but then quickly loads of people started getting involved, and actually it became sort of oversubscribed. There's like 2 or 3 sound designers working on one small little game jam game. But that was definitely a really good way to meet people and to just try out see how good I can make something in a day or 2 days. And that's really how I sort of started to build up a portfolio. And yeah, meeting people who are working in the industry. And I guess my first sort of kind of opportunity and break into the games industry was a friend of mine started producing a PlayStation VR indie title, and they needed some music and for their trailer that was going to be shown at Paris Games Week. So I did some music for that, and then afterwards they're like, we also need some audio, can you do that too? Yeah, and I said absolutely. So I did a bit of that, and they liked what I did, and yeah, it just sort of went on from there really, and continued on with them and to the release of the game. yeah, that sort of kind of snowballed and started getting asked onto other projects, and eventually found my way to Sumo.
Fantastic. And it's always a buzz when you first hear your music, particularly on a game, isn't it? I've done without sort of blowing my own trumpet, but you do need to occasionally. We worked with Jeff Minter on Polybius, the VR game, the PlayStation VR game, and when they teased some video of Polybius on the Sony site, it was our track that was on that trailer for it, and it was such a buzz, you know, to be associated with Jeff Minter, but also to have that track on the site as well, on the Sony site, and have it seen by so many people and heard by so many people. It was really exciting for us, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys when your tracks get used in things, because the amount of people that see things in the games industry is huge compared to the music industry. You know, it's such a massive audience, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, should we go with Jay next?
Yeah, sure. So I think Ross can probably attest to this as well. Back when I started, you were just kind of like the guy that did everything, the sound guy. So my kind of pathway into it, I did a music degree, and it was about partway through that degree that I kind of realized that, you know, there were jobs that existed writing music for games. So that kind of put me in that direction, really. I then graduated, and I spent the next about 3 years running my own studio for a bit. And then I guess it was kind of luck, really, as well. A job came up at Team 17, which was not far from me. It was pretty much the only game developer I would have been able to commute to, really. And that was just running their audio. This was about 2006, and I just applied, and I got it, and it started from there, really. Like, I was just kind of dropped right into it. Like I said, you were doing everything, so about 50% of your time was spent composing the music, and then the rest was doing the sound design and, you know, and a bit of VO. Like I mentioned in the chat, I think it was Worms Open Warfare 2 was my first game. On the PSP and DS, I think, as well.
Fantastic. Some legendary stuff came out of that studio as well, didn't it, over time? I think Worms has got a place in everybody's heart. You know, from people of a certain age love the Worms games.
Yeah, and yeah, so someone's just asked in the chat. Yeah, I did work on Space Oddity. That was on the Wii. That was an interesting project.
Excellent. And it's great as well with the students, because obviously for me, Worms is quite an old game now, but it's still relevant, isn't it? So it's good to see that
they're still making them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So right, over to Ross.
Yeah, I guess similar to Jay, really. Like, when I started, the landscape was so different that it's almost hard to relate it to joining the industry these days. But I think there's still parts of like my journey to here that are still relevant. Like, I mean, when 15, 20 years ago, the audio teams were much smaller, and like you said, you just get like 1 or 2, maybe 3 guys just doing all the music and all the sound design. So with those smaller teams, it was very hard to find the work. But I think it was a case of when I was given some opportunities, because I started just doing a few bits of like freelance work for Free Radical in Nottingham, and I still stand by this, that if you're given some good opportunities, then it's really a case of delivering well and being communicative and reliable, like, I guess, more than anything, so that when, you know, teams expand, or if they're looking to get someone down the line, then you'll be the person they think of. So that part of it is still valid, I think. But for like people joining the industry these days, I think the teams are bigger and the requirements are more specific. I mean, there's certain like audio middleware and things like that it's good to know. You can research online, or just find me online after and send me a message. I can explain what some good things are to know about if that's something you want to learn about. But yeah, for me, it was Free Radical was my first company I joined, and that was just, I started off writing a bit of music, then doing some dialogue editing, then doing a bit of sound design, and I was incredibly excited and desperate to get into the industry. So I worked very hard on it, made sure I did a good job, and when they finally expanded, I had the opportunity to get that precious into the games industry, and I think I've tried to keep that sort of ethos all the way through. If I'm doing any sort of like joining new companies or doing any sort of like freelance music and things like that, I just try and make sure I'm always communicate well, like make sure they know what I'm doing, don't disappear for ages. If there's sometimes there's a problem with the work you're doing, as long as you tell people there's a problem, it's fine. It's just because a bit on the other side as well, if you're working in studio on games, and if composers or external people just sort of disappear or go weird about something, then it's not reliable. It's the people that you know you can trust that you end up hiring for when the team expands. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway in that area.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things as well that you pick up as you go along, isn't it? That idea of the work ethic, and you realise that actually being reliable, submitting things on time, all those things are really important in the industry. No one teaches you that. You're only going to realise that, and you know that you need to rely on people that can do those things as well.
Exactly.
We've got a few questions sort of asking about the sort of general overview of sound in games. So I think it probably would be useful maybe to talk about the idea of which different disciplines there are in sound design in games, because we've got a few people asking, like, is composition really important, or is it sound editing, those kind of things. So maybe if we could just get an overview from you all, maybe about the different areas of sound in games, because I think a lot of people aren't aware 100% of those things. That would be really useful.
There's a thing that always concerns me that people don't know about more when they're applying for jobs in the industry and stuff, and that's the core split of sound designer and composer. And while there's often a lot of crossover, and if you're a sound designer with a musical background with an interest in composing, that there'll quite often be opportunities for you to do that and even segue your career in that direction. But if we have like a job role for a sound designer, quite often I'll just purely get composers applying, and so they just haven't, through whatever reason, haven't ever really got a better grip on that distinction. So I think if you're interested in getting into the games industry for either of those two paths or a combination of them, I think it's very important to learn what a sound designer is and what a composer is, and what that essential split is in the middle, just so you don't do yourself a disservice when you apply for a role by referencing wrong stuff.
I think in-house composer roles are pretty rare these days as well. So yeah, there's a question just popped up now about applying for a composition job. There aren't really going to be any composition jobs, certainly not going forward. If you're going to be a composer, you're more than likely going to be freelance. And yeah, as Ross said, we don't employ composers at Sumo really throughout the group, as far as I know. We have sound designers, and we're not looking for people with composition experience for those roles. It can help. Certainly, it's something is a positive for me, but it wouldn't kind of make or break somebody getting the job. I think having a good understanding of music and harmony, it can certainly help as a sound designer, but I don't think it's a prerequisite myself.
Real, that's great. That's really useful. We've got a few other sort of questions coming into the Q&A that I'm just going to throw out there now as well. So Guv has asked, what would an aspiring producer have in terms of music equipment and personal skills to get into the industry of making music for games? I think that's a really interesting question, because obviously, I guess in the olden days, you needed lots and lots of hardware and equipment to be able to do anything really musically, didn't you? And now it's quite different. So maybe if you could sort of talk about how things have changed, both in the industry and just in terms of music production and sound editing, etc.
Who wants to go?
Well, I'd be interested to hear, obviously, Ross, you've done a lot of composing recently, but also Jay on Sackboy. There's a lot of interesting music stuff that happened on there. So I don't know, I guess I'm sort of answering by passing passing the question on to you guys.
Well, I don't know. I think referring to Sackboy in particular is not really going to answer the question, because we had a lot of external resources, and we had an orchestra and everything. But it's going to be out of the box now. So I don't know. It kind of depends on what your genre is, really. I think what's also kind of a big thing with game composers is it's composers that want to be able to tick all boxes. So people who claim to be able to compose in any style, it's kind of a bit of a jack of all approach, and I don't think it's really helpful down the line. So for me, it's going to be what software instruments you're going to be using to make your music. Everything's out of the box now. So sorry, that didn't really answer the question very well, but
I think it's an amazing time in terms of accessibility at the sort of entry and mid-level points for music software, because you've got things like I can't remember what their bundle's called, but Native Instruments have like
complete.
But I mean, they've got like a free version which has a huge amount of content.
Yeah.
And then Spitfire libraries have their labs. If you haven't seen this before and you're a musician, definitely have a look at it. Labs is all their free stuff that they kind of experiment with when they're making their paid stuff. So, I mean, you could get, if you have pretty much no money to spend on this and you needed some tools, you could get Reaper or one of the cheaper lower end DAWs, and then the Spitfire collection and the Native Instruments collection. And to be honest, that's enough tools that you're not blocked in creating, even at that point, I think. And overall, the price points are much more realistic these days anyway. So you can slowly get stuff. Also, you have to avoid falling into a loop of telling yourself you can't do the project because you haven't got X library or whatever piece of equipment. Like, you can probably do it without it, even if it's rarely a genuine blockage.
It's interesting. We had Don Letts yesterday for the music students, and one of the things he was saying was he found it much easier to do things in the olden days because things were so restricted, because they didn't have very much to choose from. Now it's almost you've got too much stuff to choose from, and that makes
choice paralysis.
Paralysis.
So you end up doing nothing because you can't decide what instrument to use, which is a really weird
totally agree.
Yeah. So that's very relevant. The other thing, of course, with a lot of the software companies, particularly with students, they'll give you educational discount as well. So it's a really good time to be getting any kind of software, not just music making software, all kinds of different software. Use your student privilege to the maximum, really, and get whatever you can. I know with Ableton, you can get a really good discount on Ableton for students. So, and I'm sure it's the same with Native Instruments as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me just jump back to my questions quickly. So yeah, I think another thing that would probably be useful for everybody would be just sort of an insight into sort of your day-to-day workflow pattern. How does it work as a game audio person? What kind of things are you doing on a day-to-day basis? That would be a really useful insight for the students. So again, I'll throw it open to the whole panel, whoever wants to start the ball rolling. Is it going to be Dexter again? Is he drawing?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm there. I think for me, it depends what stage of the project you're on. If you're early in development, then there's a lot more sort of, just sort of planning and possibly research, depending on what kind of thing you're doing. Compared to when it gets into the later stages of a project, when there's a lot more testing. I think there's always testing and there's always playing going on, particularly in an early stage when you're prototyping or anything like that. But you're sort of listening with different ears, different levels of kind of critique at different stages. But yeah, day to day, I guess currently for me, I'm working on a sort of definitely a prototype kind of stage of development on a game, and so there is a lot of testing daily. There's also a lot of waiting around for things to get fixed, or waiting on certain values from programmers or game designers, so I can then be unblocked and move forward and work on my audio. But yeah, when I'm waiting for that, I'm also like thinking ahead and prepping my sessions in Wise, ready for when I've got the values ready and they're coming from the game, to get them hooked up and working, so I can test them. So yeah, when I say I'm waiting around, I'm still doing stuff. So
that actually feeds into another question that somebody's asked actually as well, about collaborating with different departments, which again I think will be relevant for the students, because we've got students from different courses, game art, games tech, etc. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just going to find that quick question here. It's where is it? Yeah, how do you organize and work with the other teams within Sumo or wherever you're working for at the time? Is it something that is done virtually, as in through emails and things like that, or are you having lots of meetings and things, I suppose is the way that people would like that answered?
There has to be like constant collaboration all the way through the project. There's no point really where the different teams sort of go off into their different caves and just got an animation guys over there that not talking to the audio people over there. It's every day we're talking to people of every discipline really. And if you don't do that, then you can make terrible mistakes, or you could end up spending a load of time on some audio for a feature that's already been cut, or for an animation that's not getting used anymore, and things like that. And especially for audio, because we tend to be one of the smaller departments, we have to like work quite hard to sort of promote ourselves and make sure that our work is known about and heard, because with no bad intentions, sometimes other departments sort of kind of forget about audio a little bit, and it's incredibly important that they don't. We usually find that in any department there'll be a few people that have a particular love of audio and an understanding of it in the art team or the design team or anything, and those people are great, because I mean they can understand, they're looking at the game as a whole and as the end experience, and they can see like, maybe I've just done this animation for whatever, for this guy doing a judo throw or something, and if they're just thinking about their animation, that's fine, but that's not, doesn't make them a great games developer. It's when they start thinking, okay, that's going to have this light shining on it and this audio is going to be playing when he gets thrown on the ground. That's when you kind of get beyond your own discipline and become a really good games developer, which I think is an important step.
Do you think that's important in show reels as well? Because I think, we've got a lot of game artist type people who would be creating video show reels of animations and such like. What tends to happen when we get the show reels is they might just put some sort of random audio track over it that they found. Do you think it has more impact when there are Foley sounds and the audio is sort of sympathetic to the animation that's going on if you're making a show reel?
Yeah, definitely. I think I mean everyone's got an audio friend, and just if you're an animator or an artist and you're doing a show reel, just hook in that audio friend of yours and get them to do some sound effects and things for you. It'll be infinitely better.
Mm. Yeah, I was going to say it can be a joint portfolio piece in that regard. If you collaborate with a sound designer and they can use your amazing animations you've done, or that, whatever so yeah, definitely collaborate on that kind of thing.
Great. And
or give it a go yourself. Like, if you're not a sound designer, definitely just give it a go and understand the process a bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's a great opportunity here is that normally the music and game students are quite separate, but here we've got everybody joined together. So if anybody needs to hook up, it might be a good opportunity to do it in the chat as well here while we're in this talk. So that would be really good. Got another question from one of the students here. Do you hire a role specifically for Foley and sound effects, or is that down to the sound designer as well? So I guess they're asking, is it, if you're a sound designer, are you doing all of those things, or would you actually is it better to specialize in particular areas?
Don't, again, similar to the music, you're unlikely to find an internal role at a developer specializing in Foley. There are external Foley studios, like we used to use Pinewood, who are now become Molinaire. They're a big place in London. So we do go to them as an external resource to provide Foley. But we're also do some internal. We're doing an increasing amount ourselves at Sheffield, thanks to the new studios that Confetti have helped us with. And we've actually been in there this last couple of weeks doing some early kind of footstep recordings ourselves. So yeah, in answer to that question, that is something we would expect the sound designers to be, fully involved with. So the more experience in that field, the better, really.
Brilliant, great. So in terms of software that you're using on a day-to-day basis, what kind of stuff are you using? I suppose there's two sides to this, isn't there? There's probably like an editing thing, and then there's more of a composition kind of element to it as well when you're putting things together.
I think to simplify it down to the base level, there's 3 stages with this. There's the first stage would be a DAW like Ableton or Cubase or Reaper or something like that, and any sort of wave editing software like RX, where you're at the first stage where you're making your content. So that's where let's say you're doing the sound for a machine gun or something. That'd be where you put it together, you layer in all your cool stuff, you make it sound fantastic, and then you will cut that down into little individual chunks of assets and layers and things like that. Then the middle stage is the middleware. You don't always have this middle stage of middleware, but in modern games, it's pretty ubiquitous to have 2 main bits of software really. You've got Fmod and Wise with 2 Ws, if anybody's looking at it. If you're looking to get a job as a sound designer, I would hugely recommend you look into one or both of those pieces of software. Yeah. Between the 2 of them, they're in almost every modern game, and you quite often won't even be considered for a role if you don't have some of that knowledge. So then that's the middleware. That's where you kind of take those sounds that you made, and you'll set what they sound like over distance and put your reverbs on them and set their levels and lots of controls and things. And then the third stage is the actual engine, which can be a special one by the company you're working for, but more often these days will be the Unreal Engine or the Unity engine. Again, if you're looking to be a sound designer in the industry, I would hugely recommend, again, one or both of those. Personal preference, if you were to pick one engine and one middleware, I would say Unreal and Audio Kinetic Wise would give you the most opportunities. But those are your 3 stages, basically.
I think it's worth adding both of those are freely downloadable, and you're able to learn them for nothing. And there is a whole host of resources online, places like YouTube for tutorials. Yeah. Really recommended.
Great.
Absolutely. And I think if you're just an audio person and you're trying to, thinking about the games industry, I'm massively encouraged to download game engines. But yeah, Unity or Unreal, like Jay said, they're free, and there's just so many resources online that you can follow to build your own levels and games. And I think that is so important, to, even if it's just something simple, just getting a character running around and then you put some footsteps on, like all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is how it works. And it can you learn from there, basically.
Yeah, and I think that idea of collaboration as well is a really useful thing for everybody. We've got people that are great animators, people that are great audio people. Let's try and bring them together, get them to work together on something that's beneficial for both of them. So we've got a geeky question about software. Someone's asked whether you use Omnisphere. I don't know if you do or not. Is that something you've used?
I do. I love Omnisphere. Yeah. It's old now, but it's really reliable. It's still got great sound. I think it's aged well as Omnisphere.
Yeah, I'm using it on Texas Chainsaw Massacre right now.
Excellent. So there we go.
Vintage
Unfortunately, it was.
VST.
I think it was an anonymous person that's asked that, so they're not going to get the credit for being an audio.
That was a Spectrasonics.
Spectrasonics guy, yeah.
It probably was, yeah. And this is, I suppose, this is an interesting one in terms of games audio in general. So some of the Marshall Smith. Give them a name check because they've actually put in the name. Musicians tend to have a style, so you can tell it's them through their own projects. So like somebody like Hans Zimmer, for example. Do you think it's the same in games? I know certainly in the sort of golden age of games, there were people, C64 sound designers particularly had a very recognizable sound, but is it the same now? Do you think it's become a little bit less obvious for specific sound designers and audio people to have a sound?
I think it's less so in games than it is, in things like movies with Hans Zimmer, because there is still an extent to which you are required to compose in a particular genre. So yeah, I think it's quite difficult to have a unique identity in that space, but it does happen. I mean, we've got a long-standing relationship with an American composer called Winifred Phillips. She's done a lot of work on the Little Big Planet franchise, and she clearly has her own thing going on there. She uses a lot of her own voice, so there's a lot of choral stuff there. She's got a very kind of distinct harmonic approach, and yeah, there is definitely, it's clear that it's her when you're listening to that music.
Yeah,
I would. Sorry, go on, Ross.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then go on, you go.
Well, thank you. I was just going to say, more so at an indie game level, that you would get some composers who do have this sound. Like there's Disaster Piece, who's done composed for lots of games like Fez and Hyperlight Drifter, and he's definitely got a distinctive sort of sound to his music. But yeah, it massively depends on the game.
Yeah, I think it's something I think it's very healthy to aim for. As you sort of specialize and as your career progresses, if it's going well, then you kind of have almost the luxury of starting to define your voice a bit more and make your content more recognizable. In the earlier days of your career, and when you're getting your first opportunities to compose, you might have to be a bit more of a generalist just to get that first work. But to be honest, even if you might be doing whatever electro jazz one day and medieval music the next, it doesn't mean you can't have some of your own voice that's still recognizable throughout that content. And I think, to be honest, if you're a composer with some personality in your music, it's going to come through naturally anyway. As someone's mentioned, like Mick Gordon, he's a very good example that at this point in his career, he's so recognizable and it's defined his identity so much that becomes something people want for their projects. So yeah, if things go very well for you and you manage to develop a voice, then you might find yourself in a position where people are hiring you because of that voice.
Yeah.
Earlier on down the line, when you're not so well known, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're not getting hired because you're too much of one thing. So I think it comes with progression in your career, maybe.
Do you think it's to do with how the industry's changed as well? Because it's interesting you mentioned the indie game thing. I think, funnily enough, it's led on from a discussion that I was just having before I came into this seminar. But the industry now has become almost more corporate in a way, because it's software companies rather than individuals in a lot of the cases, which is interesting why you mentioned the indie games, because they're definitely about individuals. So there's more chance of somebody becoming well known as a composer, say, that's associated with an indie game, than there is in working for a larger company. So it becomes almost anonymized, doesn't it, when you're working for a bigger company?
I guess, yeah, to some degree. It's a difficult one to answer, because you don't want to end up not getting opportunities or turning down opportunities because you have this sort of end vision, because you may never get there if you're turning down too much at the beginning or middle of your career. But I don't think you also want to be careful not to lose your voice, become too much of a generalist. I think just as a musician, I think it's unhealthy to become too much wallpaper, basically.
Yeah. So a question about sound design now. Is it harder to design sounds for things that don't exist, so for fictional things, or is it harder to kind of recreate things? So you know, using the machine gun, I suppose, as an example, if you had a machine gun and you needed to create sounds for it, but it needs to be realistic, compared to a completely wacky laser gun where there weren't any sounds for that kind of thing, which is more difficult, or are they both equally difficult?
I think the difficulty with real world sounds is and also depends on the context of the game you're making, but there's what something actually sounds like and what people think it sounds like and what sounds cool. And kind of get it somewhere in that triangle, I think. I say if you take like a sniper rifle, they don't sound cool in real life. They're just a big snappy bang sound, and that they're no fun. But people have played, you know, shot sniper rifles in games for so many years. People expect a certain sound out of them. So yeah, reality is actually quite difficult because reality is not really quite often what people want when they hear the sounds.
Yeah, I can see that, and I think that's an important lesson in itself, isn't it? Because you would think, oh yeah, well, if we want a sound of a sniper rifle, we'll go and just record it, you know, with an audio recorder, and actually it sounds pretty rubbish then. So you've got to add stuff to it and make it much more exciting for a game player. Yeah. Reality is often disappointing. Someone just put a mantra.
But at the same time, if you're designing sound for something that doesn't technically exist, you don't really have that frame of reference. So you're gonna be more likely to question whether it's right to yourself. So certainly for me, it would take me longer to kind of become happy with it. But that might just be me.
No, I'm exactly the same.
I think it's different when you're in it, isn't it, as well, because you know what you've used to create that sound, you know, and so you have probably a different perception of it than somebody that hasn't got that awareness of what it was. One of the things I like about Ben Burt with the Star Wars sound design is some of the things that he used was so crazy, you know, the actual original sounds, but we listen to them all and we're sort of a step back from it, aren't we? So we don't know necessarily that was kind of the sound of a bear or whatever it was that he used for some of the strange sounds.
Like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that we're working on at the moment is a great example of that, because obviously there's a chainsaw. I don't think that's going to be a spoiler. So you've got that triangle because we have the sounds of that real chainsaw. We have how that chainsaw sounded in the original film, and then we have how people would want it to sound in a game to make it sound cool and modern and fun. So it's been very difficult moving around that triangle to find the sweet spot where it sounds realistic, it sounds like the film, and it's fun to hear in the game. So that's a core regular complication of being a sound designer in a pleasant way.
So I've got a few questions just about sort of the journey into audio here. We've got Joseph has asked, if you could start your career from zero to hero, how would you do it? Would you focus on studies, college, university, etc., or would you spend more time doing practical things and getting practice in the art form or in sound design? Which path would you recommend, or is there no path to recommend? Is it all valid?
It's all valid. Just all of it.
Because everybody has a different route into different things, don't they? Yeah, it's you've sort of explained how you three have got into the industry. It's different for everybody.
My kind of view on it is you don't necessarily have to do a university course that is game audio to get into it, but at the same time, doing a course gives you the time, gives you the freedom to explore, try things out. And I think that is immensely valuable. And it also means you can, work and collaborate and meet people.
Which again, that's really relevant. Again, just sorry, jumping out, I don't want to cut you off, Russ.
No, no.
From where you are when you're in university, especially in a creative place like where we are now in Confetti, it's one of the only times you're going to be surrounded by people who are massively creative, but in different areas to you. You know, when you go and work in a company, you'll be surrounded by people who are quite similar to you, but here you've got people that are really helpful to you, actually, all around you, and you don't realize that probably until you've left that environment.
Exactly.
It's a strange one. I'm sure you'd all agree with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you can do both, then definitely that's the recommended route. But I think there's a lot to be said for how much you can learn yourself just by diving in and, you know, spending a lot of time. If you can invest that time and show that dedication, you know, that's going to easily get you a job just as much as having a qualification on your CV.
Yeah, I think passion and dedication to what you're doing, like if it's genuine, then it always shines through, like, and it will show in the like example work you do in your show reels and your online presence, where you're just talking about how excited you are about sound design in film and games and stuff. Just enthusiasm and positivity. Lifebloods of the industry. So just let that show. Yeah,
I've got a 9-year-old son, and he's really into Scratch and Make Code Arcade. And he said to me last night, "I wish I could just do this all day instead of going to school." And I'm pretty sure, giving him another 8 years, you know, that'll be more than enough for a career in games. But you know, such is the law and all that.
Yes. Okay. I've got a question about portfolios from Tommy Lee. What kind of work would you need to have in your portfolio before you have a good chance of getting hired for a bigger job? So kind of, I suppose, just some portfolio tips in terms of, and I guess this could be wider than just game audio as well, you know, because obviously you've got a little bit of experience, all of you, from the industry in general. I think this could be probably a wider question in terms of everything for portfolio.
I think I've got a more specific tip and then a more general tip, I would say, on this. In terms of specifics, there's obviously a lot of people getting into the industry aren't yet in the industry, so they haven't got a lot of work to show on their show reel, which people say to me a lot, and I understand that frustration. Something you can do, which is completely understood and sort of acceptable for show reels for the industry, is doing redesigns of existing content. So if you just grab like some gameplay footage or a trailer or whatever of some games that you're interested in, nuke all the sound and just redo the sound design or the music, whatever it is that you're showing. And just as long as you clearly label that with "I've redesigned this," so it doesn't look like you're trying to say that you did the original sound, that's completely acceptable and very common. So if you bear that in mind, you can just go away and just go and find your 5 favorite games now, get some cool clips of them and start working on the sound design for them, which is cool. In terms of a more general tip, I think showing diversity in your show reel is very important. I remember, like, when I was long ago in the industry, my first, God knows how many games were all first-person shooters, most of them like sci-fi games. And so my show reel was just, you know, sci-fi first-person shooters again and again and again and again. And I remember I got some feedback on a job I didn't get. They said, it's obviously you know how to do that, but we didn't see any evidence of anything else. So I think if you can just show wild variety of, if you've got some crazy project you've done in your own time in the Unreal Engine or some weird installation, something like that, just put it all in. It shows enthusiasm and diversity.
Yeah, I would also as well, I think it is good to show a bit of a, you know, cross section of all the things you can do, but I think you do need to, if you're going for a particular job, you need to sort of try and tailor the show reel a bit more, to suit the games that the games company makes or that kind of thing. But yeah, I think definitely being able to show a bit more of a cross section is definitely good.
I'd add hands-on experience to that as well. If any opportunities are out there to join small indie teams or game jams and actually, you know, get those sounds implemented yourself, that sits really nicely alongside, you know, typical stuff like sound replacement.
Yeah.
It's worth
Yeah.
plugging our games jams. We've got a games jam happening right now at the moment, and then there's another one. We're doing a collaboration with Jämkä in Finland, which is a university in Finland, tomorrow and Thursday. So if anybody hasn't signed up for that, definitely get in there. It's a really good opportunity to get involved with some games design and some sound design as well.
Game jams are just really fun.
Yeah,
we have them at Sumo, at the different studios, periodically, and they're just really fun to get involved with. And you don't necessarily have to do what your discipline is. You can just do a bit of something else. It's nice. And when it comes to sound redesigns as well, there's often sound designers who in our sort of team audio teams channel will just drop in, "Oh, I've done this over the weekend. What do you think?" Which is quite nice. I think everyone's sort of interested in what people are doing. So
great. Got a couple of questions just sort of about immersive elements. We've got one from Jonathan Bruin, who's a game art student, saying in game art they use psychology knowledge, particularly with how colours make people feel. Is there much psychology involved in producing sound, particularly I guess for environmental sound and potentially music as well?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to rely on more instinctual stuff for that. Like if you're trying to invoke an emotion, there's obviously there's lots of tricks you can do, but, you know, like dropping ambiences out to make things feel uncomfortable, or sort of sounds that are agitating and things like that. Like false positives, I always find very interesting for sound design. And like if you think of the game, if any of you have played Alien Isolation, they did a great job in that, both in terms of visual and audio, for like false positives of the alien before you encountered it, where there would be sounds that sounded like scurrying footsteps, or shadows that looked like the alien moving. So I think playing little tricks on people for sound design can be really interesting. Yeah, it's I mostly rely on gut instinct to try and draw out emotions in people in the immersive sound design stuff. Yeah,
there's also the just the nature of 3D audio, you know, playing around with that and positioning, to give people a sense of where things are and where things might be, where you want them to look. So that's less directly on the actual design of the sound itself, but the design of the implementation of those sounds.
Yeah, the placement particularly. Yeah, great. So we've talked a little bit about favorite things, but have you got favorite composers or favorite sound from games? There's a few students have been asking that as well. So
my favorite composer is Ross Tregenza.
No, we've already done the raises for this year. So.
Or I suppose probably more who's been inspirational to you, you know, in your job. So I suppose that could be musically or in terms of sound design itself. That's probably a better question, isn't it?
I had a sort of formative music was the Last Ninja on the Commodore 64 when I was young. Just the sound of the SID chip music on the Commodore just really resonated with me, and I didn't know at that point, obviously as a little kid, that this is what I wanted to do, but it was always with me, and as time went on I realized it was an option. So I think just those early composers and the amount that they did with so little, when they had, you know, just like 4 tracks of beepy sounds basically to work with, and they managed to get something so evocative. I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think Last Ninja's been with me my whole life.
Yeah, that's either Rob Hubbard or Ben Dalglish?
No, it's Ben Dalglish, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, one of the two,
yeah.
I think my early inspiration was probably a bit later. Is a guy called David Wise. Did a lot of Nintendo stuff with Rare, and I think it was the Donkey Kong Country games. Yeah, kind of a big inspiration for me.
Oh yeah, some students are agreeing with the David Wise comments. Yeah.
Awesome. I think in terms of like dynamic music and realizing how much music can change in a game and how it can tie into like game parameters and different factors, I think it was Red Dead Redemption was a point where I was already doing music for games, but listening to it as you moved from one area to another and how how it changed tonally based on where you were in the game, that sort of reactive aspect of game music started becoming a real passion of mine. And also in that game, just that it the music would sort of flow in and out and leave space for the ambient sound. The interplay was very clever. I think that was a point that I started thinking more deeply about dynamic music, which is now a huge passion.
There's that one bit in the game where you're moving from America over to Mexico, and then there's that Jose Gonzalez track just comes in.
That was a huge moment in game music, I think.
Do you think when you're playing a game now, you're playing it in a different way because you are looking at that sound element of it? I guess this is one of the things that everybody struggles with, because when you learn about audio particularly, and to a certain degree it's the same for games designers, you're actually analyzing constantly, I think, aren't you? It's so you almost don't enjoy the game as much because you're thinking, well, I would have done that differently, or that didn't quite work. And do you think that's the case?
I think it is. I think it's similar to when you learn music and start understanding harmony. You stop being able to listen to a song for itself, and just instead you're working it out and figuring out what they're doing. And
it kind of ruins it, doesn't it? Yeah.
I can still enjoy film music generally. I can immerse myself, but playing any game, I can't help but mentally fixing bugs, or just trying to, if it's very good, then I'll be just trying to unpack how they've done what they've done in terms of like dynamic music systems and like sound design systems and things. But it doesn't just ruin it completely. It's just part of my brain is still ticking away thinking about what they've done.
Yeah, good. So we've got some, I'm just going to be getting quite a few questions coming in now, so I've got quite a lot to scroll through. Somebody's asking, again, a games art student, they're saying they're an animation games art student, but game audio is really important to them. Is it possible to move between different disciplines? So, could you be a game artist, but also an audio artist at the same time, and switch between the two? I'm assuming you could, because you could be a jack of all trades, really, but whether
I think at indie level, maybe. I think that kind of does tend to happen in the smaller indie studios, but it's unlikely to happen really at a bigger place like Sumo anyway.
Yeah, I think for any like if you're talking about at this sort of whatever it is, 50 or 100 beyond size studio where you have defined teams and like actual structure of producers and stuff like that, it's just, it doesn't really make sense at that level. You're being hired for a role at that point, like you would for any company. And so
you could potentially move roles. That does happen in games to a small extent. Quite often people enter in by the QA or production, and then they kind of end up having more of a creative flair and moving across. But there's not a great deal of call for generalists really these days.
So that's good advice, to try and specialize whatever your field is. So if you're going to be a game artist, specialize in that. If you're going to be an audio person, unless you want to be an indie designer, and in which case you probably need to be a bit of a jack of all trades, don't you, to do that. But you're not going to be in the same position as if you were working for a larger company.
That being said as well, like particularly at the moment on the stage of the project I'm working on is I'll often be doing, I'm not necessarily doing art kind of stuff, but I'll be doing game design and like just building little prototype levels for myself so I can test the things I'm working on out. So there's a bit of like
overlap,
a bit, but it's not going to be in the final thing. So.
And also like knowledge of another discipline is always a good thing. So let's say you're primarily a sound designer, but you have a passion for animation, then it could be that while it doesn't make sense in a big company to unlikely to shift role, if you're the guy on the team that has the biggest knowledge of animation, the ins and out of it, it's likely you could become kind of the point person on the audio team for dealing with animation. So there's always a chance to just sort of steer a little bit in the direction you have a passion
in. It's asking about a sound effect, but I guess this is probably a wider one as well. What's the trickiest project that you've had to come up with a solution for? So maybe that could be making a sound for something, or it could be a piece of audio for something. I don't know. Have you got an example of one of those tricky situations, and how did you get through it and sort of get to the end of that and submit the thing?
I've got one for this. It was on the last game on Sackboy. We had this thing called the phase light. It was kind of like this UV light, and it would, wherever it shone, it would create matter on which the player could run. So we were charged with the task of creating like a looping sound for this matter, and a way of making it materialize and move around and not really get too annoying, and it could sit like well with the music. And then partway into that, they then decided that this light could also make matter disappear. So then we had to kind of take the whole concept and make the sound of something disappearing. And yeah, it took us months, and then the levels changed so that it was then an auto-scrolling level with multiple of instances of these lights making this matter either disappear or appear or cut holes in it. And in the end, we decided that silence worked the best.
That's great.
Brilliant.
I think a tricky one for me was Team Sonic Racing, because Sega provided us with a lot of the very, very early Sega sounds, and they asked us if we had the opportunity, like, do try and incorporate these sounds in as much as possible, and also like the classic ring pickup sound, things like that. There were things that kind of needed to be there that were classic sounds, but they're very simple, very old sounds. And when they're being framed in the context of the rest of the game, is very modern. Yeah, it's just environmental sounds and modern music and stuff. We found it quite difficult to place those very basic early sounds. And if I tended to redesign and try and modernize them, there was a lot of kickback on it, which at the time I was quite moody about. But in retrospect, me trying to change the sound of the pickup of the rings in Sonic is absolutely ridiculous. So I do agree with them in the end. But yeah, sometimes games like that, sort of very loved titles that are established, incorporating all those elements in a way that still sounds good and in line with your new game, could be tricky.
Yeah, I suppose that's a really difficult thing, isn't it? That's like, messing with the Beatles or something like that. If someone does a cover version of the Beatles, it's like, I'm not sure. Yeah, because they're so established, aren't they, those sounds?
Exactly.
Brill. I'm going to go scroll through my questions again. Oh, this is a good one. So this is Cactus Rainbow. When delivering audio, is there a standard that's expected, such as sample rate, ISRC data, etc.? And are there any issues that arrive with mismatches in sample rates and fidelity? So basically, if we're submitting something for a project, is there a standard format, or is it all different formats?
You guys want to go?
Well, I think we're still on probably a minimum of 44.1K 16-bit, but I think there is a tendency to go a bit higher now than that, because your source WAVs don't get packaged up into the game, so you can afford that luxury of the storage space, because then they get converted for the actual in-game sound. So keeping your source sounds as kind of high resolution as possible there's a lot of benefit in that, really.
Yeah, I mean, you're able to return to them, obviously, and you can do a lot more if the stuff you're working with before it gets like folded down to the game is high quality. And there's loudness compliance now, which is when we're in the last stages of a game and we're submitting it, there's sort of rules for LUFS is the loudness metering standard these days, and it has to be within a certain bracket, which is a much better measure of sound, as because like before that in the older days it'd just be like 0 dB or something like that, just make sure it doesn't clip and things like that, which is very basic. But with loudness, it's kind of over time, so it gives you a better indication of the actual genuine volume of the game.
Cool. That's an interesting thing in general, actually. I suppose when you're dealing with multiple different sound sources and different sounds, is it easy to get the levels mixed together? Because I imagine in a game it's probably more tricky than mixing a song where we've got a mixing desk and it's all very straightforward. Is that something that has been problematic in the past for people as well?
Yeah, I mean, like we listen to the game all through every day, so we tend to be sort of mindful of it and keeping levels reasonable as we work through a project with that end result in mind. But yeah, I'm sure the other guys will agree. It's still it's a difficulty getting that balance right, especially at the last stages.
Yeah, I think most sound designers will just generally default to dropping their sounds in at a level that works with with everything else that's in there. You do get some kind of outliers and some things often going in too loud, but yeah, you just kind of work with a rough mix throughout development, and then increasingly so these days, you'd spend a good 4 to 6 weeks right at the very back end, mixing it properly.
Great. I'm going to go and pick another one at random. George Boone's asked if you worked on Star Citizen, Ros. This is specifically for you. And what was your experience like on that project?
Yes, I did. It was lovely. It was quite a big audio team. I think probably the biggest I've worked with. And it's a huge game. There's a lot of misunderstanding surrounding Star Citizen and what it is, but the playable part of it, which is playable, is pretty amazing. And as a sound design challenge for the team, it's pretty crazy that you can just get in any ship and fly to any planet. So and then get out the ship and then get on a bike and drive around it. So the challenges for Star Citizen were very much technical, more than creative, because obviously we needed to sound cool and interesting, but we were presented with a lot of difficulties for just keeping all those sounds moving in the correct way, making sure the right ones were loaded in. And also the music, because I built a dynamic music system with the audio code guys when I was there. And that was a very pleasant, complicated challenge of divining what the player's doing at any given moment and how the music should react to that. Because we had very sort of grand orchestral music quite a lot of the times. And it would start ramping up as you get into a space fight, and then you kill all the ships, and then you're out there in the darkness on your own, but the orchestra is still going absolutely crazy. So it became an interesting learning exercise in picking somewhere in the line between sort of immediacy and musicality for dynamic music. Like, do we let this melody play out even though like nothing's happening, or do we have to cut it off? And it was somewhere in the middle in the end. We just had to learn to keep a melodic structure of things quite tight, so that if the music needed to change on the fly, that we could do so in a nice sort of elegant way. But yeah, it was a very fun project.
Brilliant. I suppose it's more of a technical and sort of organizational question here, which is relevant, I think. So when you're approaching sound design, have you got autonomy on the sound in terms of the sounds that are required, or is that done on a team level? So would you be in a meeting with the games designers, and will they say we want this kind of sound here, this kind of sound here, or would you be allowed to go away and sort of come up with that yourself? Are you left to it? I suppose it might vary from project to project as well. So
I think and it also depends on the context of what's needed. I think there are definitely times where game designers will maybe, and hopefully they're thinking about audio, and they're saying, we need this particular type of feedback here for the player to indicate something, or we need to draw the player's attention to this. They won't necessarily tell us what the sound should be. This is what it needs to be. They might try and give an example of something as a point of reference. But usually you go from there.
Do they do? I suppose in the film industry, it's relatively commonplace for us to have like dummy tracks almost to sort of say, here's the feel of what we want for this particular thing. Does that happen in the games industry as well?
It can do.
Yeah.
I mean, if it depends on the game and who you have available to you, I guess. Like if you have internal composers or people that could just throw in some early versions of tracks, then that's great. Sometimes you might have for if you've got a game that's very narrative driven, you've got a load of cutscenes and things, you may even throw in some temp tracks like you would for a film. It's about context really, and obviously, especially in terms of the music, you have to be incredibly careful because you can't be having a build of the game leaving the studio to go to publishers and things really with tracks in that you don't have the rights for, because you could end up in a horrible mess there.
Yeah, we've traditionally used a lot of temp tracks on Little Big Planet because, I mean, you're normally based around very short 3 or 4 minute levels, which work really well for licensed music, and there's always a keen push from production to get music in, to kind of realize the full feel of a level, and most often those tracks are thrown in before we've even got any clearance on them. Often we will get it, but sometimes you don't, and you get this thing what we refer to as temp love, where people are so used to this track and they love that track, and then whatever you put in its place is never going to be good enough.
Can I ask a question to Jay about Sackboy and because there's some levels which are obviously the music is so tied in with. How did that work with the game design and the?
So it kind of worked in reverse. We had to have these tracks. We had to have them cleared before anybody could even start thinking about it, and we had to have them implemented. And they were sliced up horizontally and vertically, and then it was from that point that design could start thinking about, how that level's going to work, which made it very difficult because we were also signing massive bands, and Bowie, for example, so getting clearance on that track took quite a while.
But sounds really cool. So it's worth
awesome.
it. Yeah. Another one, anonymous one, unfortunately. Do you use in-engine technologies in the sound design process? So, for example, if there's like a reverb facility in the engine, would you use that, or would you actually put the reverb into the sound design itself?
I think we tend to generally, if we're using middleware for a project such as Wise or Fmod, then it will be handled in that most commonly. If for 100% that some sound that you're doing is in a situation where you can design that reverb yourself at the beginning of the process, you can do that. But game development being as changeable as it is, that's rarely a good idea. So we tend to do all the sort of the creative aspects of the reverb and stuff like that in the middleware, in the middle of that process, and then that's handled in game.
Yeah, I'd add in other effects to that these days as well. I mean, what we're tending to do nowadays is any post-production on voiceover, we'll run that in the middleware now, and then it kind of saves a lot of work when it comes to localization. I mean, obviously you couldn't do that 10 years ago, but we've got the kind of the capacity to do that now.
Yeah.
So that leads on, I suppose, to another question. What do you think? Where do you see the industry in 5 years in terms of game audio? What do you think the big technological innovations are going to be?
I think we've seen most of them, really. I mean, Atmos is, slowly creeping in terms of mixed standards, but that's not going to get surpassed for a long time now, I don't think. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think, I agree with you, Jay. It's like 10 years ago, maybe, we were still struggling a little bit with the limitations of what we were working with. And we were having to compromise creative choices and stuff because of, amounts of memory or numbers of sound or very basic sort of live effects on the stuff we were using. But it's lovely to say it, but we're kind of for us, we're in a golden age of audio for games now. It's very pleasant, the work, and our limitations are very few, I'm pleased to say. So
yeah,
I think one thing that I kind of suspect might happen is coming a kind of like full circle back to MIDI music implementation. I mean, back in the old like SNES days, then obviously music was MIDI based and that was triggering sound banks that were on the chip. I think we've now reached a point where we can run software instruments that sound as good as if you'd kind of, were putting in live music. And obviously you can do a hell of a lot more if you've got your MIDI generating your music. I think we're still some way off yet, but I think Dreams that has taken that approach, that has virtual instruments at runtime, and then the music is kind of data driven, and it sounds good. And I think we're gonna gravitate towards that over the next, I'd say, 10 years. I think.
Yeah, maybe one specific area that may sort of have major advancements, and you're sort of starting to see it a little bit here, is when it comes to dialogue and like AI generated voices, that kind of thing. There's already that kind of stuff which sometimes used for placeholder dialogue now. You can still tell it's kind of a bit robotic in places and the performance isn't quite there, but yeah, I can definitely see that putting voice actors potentially out of a job, which is
I don't think that'll ever.
You don't think? No. Yeah.
But an interesting thing with the technology of game audio is that even if you get to a point where, say like reverb, for example, like you could have it like doing sort of tests in real time in your game to figure out how the reverb should sound. But it'll always come down in the end to there's a difference between simulated reality and creating an emotional experience for someone. So you can fake the reverb and you can do sort of procedurally generated music, but sometimes you want things in a game to be emotionally designed by an artist. And so I think while there's great technologies that are making life a lot better, there's some aspects that always need to be sort of curated, I think, by the sound design guys.
Right, really interesting discussion there. That was good. So I think we're almost at the end now. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to choose wisely. We've got a few questions that haven't been asked yet. Bailey's asked an interesting one about game audio being something that we can outsource to different people. So I mean, you're working in an audio department, but obviously there's lots of freelance game audio people. Do you think that changes the industry? Because I suppose we lose the idea of this in-house team creating audio if it's done by freelancers, or do you think it's always been a mixture of the two, having an in-house studio that does game audio and then a mixture of freelancers as well?
I think we're growing to more of an outsourced industry, kind of closer to films. Films have always been just a group of freelancers, really, and I don't really think it holds you back. You will always have you kind of creative leads at the developer, but I think it makes a lot of sense to outsource certain things to the people that do the best job, really. I mean, that's how you make a AAA game these days, is you hire the best people.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different time, obviously, post-COVID. Now that for the games industry, it's clearly proven that we can work from home if needs be, and games didn't stop during the pandemic and everything. And also, it kind of makes more sense for some studios to have this smaller internal nucleus team that's just like a few people, and then because you'll get big projects, maybe they get downscaled or another one comes in quickly. So it's great for a team to be able to have a core nucleus and then expand in and out and bring in freelance people. So it's a very good time to be a freelance sound designer and composer, I think there are way more opportunities than there were 5 years ago. So it's a very valid career path now.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly towards the end of a project when everything needs to be polished off. That's the time when freelancers are going to come in.
So tied into that then, what I'd like at the end, just to sort of sign off, is just a piece of advice from each of you for our students now, really. You know, what would be the piece of advice that if you could travel back in time, you wish you'd had when you were in their position, potentially studying at college or just about to leave university? What piece of advice would you give yourself and in turn them?
Games are awesome. Get involved in the industry. No, genuinely, just get involved. And I just really liked meeting loads of people with similar interests, and whether it's talking about audio or talking about games, or both at the same time. Meeting people, making friends, and
I would say alongside that is, I think we've covered it a bit earlier on, is to choose exactly what it is you want to do. Don't try and be jack of all trades. So if it is sound design you want to do, then put the composing to one side and kind of hone your skills on that front, really.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. I think just let your passion shine through. Like, get out there, make sure there's sort of visibility of the work you're doing. Talk to people on social media and stuff. Like sound designers and composers, very friendly, open people. It's not a closed industry, and a lot of us only joined the industry through the support of people when we were starting. So I think we're all very aware that it can be a difficult industry to get into. We're more than happy to talk about things to do and best practices and stuff. So I think just be passionate, be social, and find specifically what it is that you're interested in and focus down a little bit.
Great, that's been really helpful. I hope the students have found it really interesting and helpful for them as well. It's kind of weird in these online things because normally we'd have applause and stuff like that now, and yay, woohoo, and it's kind of, that doesn't come through in an online thing, but perhaps the students can express their thanks in the chat. Thanks for everybody for participating. It's been really insightful and interesting for everybody, I'm sure. And I'll just stress that whole idea of networking again. Use these opportunities in Industry Week to talk to other people, to talk to the industry guests. I'm sure everybody's quite happy for you to ask questions and get in touch at some point. So please do that, and obviously talk to each other as well. Utilize the joy of Confetti and the creative people that inhabit Confetti, because you won't have them forever. You'll move on and they'll all be gone. So you need to make those contacts with them now, so you've got them for the rest of your life. If you need an audio person, you know where to go. Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much to Ross, Jay and Dexter, and hopefully you'll enjoy some more Industry Week activity over the rest of the week. Do remember to do the old hashtag IW22. It's kind of weird in an online thing because there's not much you can do to take a photograph and hashtag it, but obviously there are some face-to-face events that you can get involved with as well. Do keep doing what you're doing, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.